Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world today, and a warm welcome to this session of Development Dialogues. My name is Peter Batchelor, and I'm the head of the UNDP Crisis Bureau Policy and Engagement team, and it's a real pleasure to be your moderator and host today. Today, we're talking about data and our work in crisis and fragile contexts, and the title of this session, as you can see on the slide, is If You Can Measure It, You Can Improve It. And I think we would all agree that to better understand and improve our work in crisis and fragile contexts, we need to do a better job of collecting and analyzing and using data. The COVID pandemic has clearly shown us that good quality data and analysis is key to protecting lives and livelihoods, and of course also to promoting inclusive and sustainable development. We have a fantastic session today where we're going to hear about a number of new and exciting data initiatives that data teams across UNDP are implementing to improve the quality of our work in crisis and fragile settings. These initiatives include new modeling techniques, new platforms, tools and standards, and the use of new technologies for data collection, visualization and analysis, operating at country level all the way to global level. All of these initiatives are being implemented as part of UNDP's GPN Data Hub and within the framework of UNDP's new data strategy, which is also aligned with the UN Secretary General's data strategy. As you all know, the Secretary General has called for a data revolution to tackle the underlying factors driving fragility and inequality, in particular through better gender responsive data and analysis. So UNDP's data strategy and the GPN Data Hub, which we'll hear more about shortly, will provide the corporate umbrella for these initiatives, and of course many other data initiatives that will emerge in the future. Let me also just note that today's event is just the start of a conversation on this important topic, and that there will be a follow-up event in early June, also as part of the development dialogues, where we will hear from an expanded group of outside partners. As I mentioned, we're now about to hear from a range of different initiatives across UNDP, and it gives me great pleasure today to introduce our first speaker, David Hammond, I think who's based in Australia and is the Research Director of the Institute of Economics and Peace. And David will be sharing with us their work with us on UNDP's new fragility model. So David, over to you and a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thanks very much, UNDP, for inviting me to this event. It's a real pleasure to be here. So as introduced, my name is David Hammond. I'm the Director of Research at the Institute for Economics and Peace, and we're going to go through some work that we've been doing with UNDP just on a fragility model. And I'll go through the process, I'll go through the indicators. In the interest of time, I won't dwell on the indicators and just talk more about some of the interesting challenges, some of the applications, and also some of the work that the Institute for Economics and Peace has done in this field, which you know, has been useful and shows the application of these sort of fragility models. So the idea for this particular fragility model was to base it around the 4 Ps of UNDP: people, planet, prosperity, and peace. We started at the start of the year in January. The Institute for Economics and Peace put together a draft index based on its own experience and sort of assessment of where a good starting point would be. We've gone through a review and feedback process through UNDP, and we have a draft index or model for the presentation today. But the idea is that this will be developed further. The idea was that it would be a data-driven measure for fragility. The aim was to keep it simple because there is a tendency when building these fragility models or any sort of composite index to have this sort of kitchen sink approach, which you know, can muddy the waters a little bit when you're trying to do this. And the idea is also to longer term incorporate qualitative indicators, and I'll talk about a little bit about why that was developed that way. The whole purpose from the Institute for Economics and Peace's experience of building these fragility models is really sort of touched upon by Peter's opening remarks. There is a lot of data out there, and the idea of these fragility models is not to produce another list or sort of, you know, have any sort of sort of agenda, but it's to go through a process of prioritization so that the data that is presented has been vetted and is the most relevant to any particular intervention or any particular field. So very quickly, just to go through the 4P framework, there's 4 domains: people, planet, prosperity, and peace. Within those domains, they've been developed 15 concepts, and currently we're at 29 indicators. The concepts within the 4Ps are within people, broken social contract, inequality, youth, crisis recovery, violence, and health. Within planet, there's climate change, natural hazard, and natural resource degradation. Within prosperity, governance deficit, fragile cities, economic stability, and digitalization. Within peace, there's thinking and working politically, transborder and regional trends. And so the work that we've been doing with UNDP is to try and put the most relevant and timely data to these 4 domains and 15 concepts. So just to go through, as I said, I don't want to dwell on the individual indicators in the interest of time, but just to give you a flavor of where we're currently at after the review process. Within broken social contract, we're looking at sort of corruption and public trust in politicians and group grievance. Inequality, we're looking at primarily income inequality, but we've been reviewing a number of other measures of inequality. Youth, confidence in national government to be aligned with the SDGs has been included, and youth not in education, employment or training. Violence and health, currently infant mortality rates. Within planet, which is the area that I think probably has the most data available to really sort of to add value here. But currently, just to get a draft index going, we're using the climate risk index. For natural hazards, we're using hazard and exposure. Natural resource degradation, we're using the AL Environmental Protection Index and national resources depletion. For prosperity, again, I think some of the interesting things that differentiates this from other models that the Institute for Economics and Peace has worked on is a focus on fragile cities. There is a tendency for these fragility models to look at the national level. I think there's a real scope to include fragile cities in this particular framework. And digitalization, and I'm going to chat about digitalization in the challenges section, so I'll leave that for the time being. And in peace, we have thinking and working politically, and what we're trying to capture there is civil society participation, rule of law, and quality of democracy. And transborder and regional trends, currently it's ongoing conflict, which is a measure from our Global Peace Index from the Institute for Economics and Peace. But one thing that we're doing internally at IEP is trying to tackle this transborder issue and international relations, which is an area that while there's data out there isn't sort of an obvious candidate to track transborder and regional trends at a sort of international relations level. And certainly over the past 5-10 years, with shifting power dynamics across the globe, it's becoming an area that certainly IEP is interested in, and it's an area that we could sort of develop in this fragility model. So some of the challenges, and I think challenges is perhaps a sort of the wrong word. I think in terms of these fragility models, there's been a tendency to focus on the same types of indicators and the same types of fragility. And I think what 2020 really highlighted to everyone is that there were underlying fragilities that were previously unthinkable within the global system, within domestic systems, and how. So while this slide's called challenges, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of, certainly from a research perspective, a lot of scope to do some very hard thinking and reflecting on 2020 and what that actually means for fragility. And some of the things that came out through this indicator selection process is digitalization. Is that good or bad? from a traditional fragility and development perspective, which looks at, more broadly access to internet and access to technology. It's traditionally been considered a good thing, but obviously over the past few years, certainly, maybe spanning back further, there is a negative aspect to digitalization. And so in the work that we've done for this particular modeling framework, which is something that's new and I've not seen anywhere else, is we've tried to capture the good and bad. So in the good, we've captured technological adoption and access to internet and technology, but we've also, found indicators on, whether social media has been used to incite violence within a country, and whether government monitoring is prevalent within a country. And so combining those two things, I think, is one, a differentiator for this particular fragility model, but I think it's one of the key questions when talking about development and fragility going forward. And the obvious big question on the table is COVID-19. As I said, there's what COVID has done is highlight fragilities that were basically unthinkable before. We've had a think through how we could capture some of those fragilities within this framework. It's doubtful whether there is data available currently to really capture that in a representative way. But certainly going forward, how these fragility models can be, if you like, backdated to see how they could have predicted some of the things that we saw in 2020 and continue to see and expect to see for the next, for the coming years. So I think while the fragility framework as it stands is at a point where we're happy to present and obtain feedback, these are some of the things that really require a lot of thinking, certainly when it comes to data and certainly when it comes to measuring fragility. How do you capture some of these sort of good and bad aspects and latent fragilities that are just invisible until they're painfully visible? So in the current state of the fragility index, the 20 most fragile countries go from South Sudan to Haiti and so forth. And so where we are is we have a set of indicators and a methodology, a statistically derived methodology to produce a ranking of fragility. But the Institute for Economics and Peace has been working in this field for a while. And so what I'd like to do is just share sort of what the next, what methodologies we've used to extract the best value from these types of models. As I said, a ranking is one thing, but how do you actually use the data to extract usable and actionable information? And one thing that we've done that we find very useful, we use it in our own work, and we've used it in a number of different areas, is using the data once it's been accepted and vetted to cluster countries, to create groupings of countries that are similar to each other. And doing that on this particular thing, you can see there's A, B, and C. And what it allows you to do is to rank the different fragilities and sort of create a taxonomy, if you like, of different types of fragilities. So broadly speaking, A, B, and C have all fragile, but they're fragile in different ways. And that's one sort of piece of information you can extract from this type of work. Certainly from Institute for Economics and Peace's point of view, engagement is critical to the success of these things. And so in this work, we've been sort of thinking about how this could supplement and complement the UNDP Crisis Risk Dashboard, and that's an ongoing conversation. And also, the quantitative side of things is very important, and it's good for policy making and policy conversations, but including experts is also very important. We do that in the Global Peace Index, And the reason we do that is we all know that the data is very readily available, but some of the sources sometimes are questionable. So having that expert input is very important. And so some of the conversations we've had on the development of this is how to incorporate a valid and measured process to extract expert assessments on fragility levels to complement the quantitative work. And so with that, I hope I'm on time. Suffice to say, thank you again very much for the invitation. Real pleasure to be here and looking forward to the conversation and questions. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, David, so much. And thank you also for sticking to time. Thanks again for highlighting some of the new elements of the index, including things like the fragile cities, which is obviously an interesting new dimension, of course, of fragility, and also the good and bad dimensions of different indicators. And also thanks for flagging the link to the crisis risk dashboards. We'll be having a presentation on our crisis risk dashboards later. So that's a nice link to one of the later presentations. But thanks again for joining us, particularly since it's very late in the night in Sydney. Let's move now to our next panelist, Laurel Patterson, our colleague from UNDP's SDG integration team. Laurel is going to be talking to us about a recent report that her team launched on the COVID impact on the SDGs, focusing on the use of data for Leave No One Behind, and obviously also the use of futures modeling for risk scenarios in terms of the work that they're doing. Laurel, over to you, please.
Peter, thank you so much. And David, great to hear your presentation too. I'm going to refer to some of it as we move forward. So my name is Laurel Patterson, and I'm going to be speaking today primarily about our work in data futures. And what I'd like to tell you a little bit about is not only what some of these new insights are and how you can use them, but also how this relates to the overall direction of UNDP, what we're thinking about and aspiring towards in our new strategic plan, but also the connections that we're making with the Secretary General's data strategy and the overall direction, which I think many partners are grappling with and thinking through right now, as David also mentioned, in the context of COVID recovery and building forward better. And the question we're asking ourselves is, how do we use data differently in order to support us to build that future that we want to see? And so I'll be talking about a couple of things today, and I'm including a link here, which you can see on the left-hand side to our SDG integration, UNDP's SDG integration web space, where you can see there's a knowledge bank and a whole set of tools, which may also be interesting to you in the work that you're doing. So one of the things we launched last year and that we're building on is a data futures platform, which is doing a couple of things. One, it's really geared towards helping us support countries, particularly via UNDP's lead role in socioeconomic recovery. There's been a tremendous amount of work that has taken place at the country level, supporting more than 119 socioeconomic recovery plans in 137 countries. And this is also really driving work that UNDP is leading in 4 main areas, and those are framed here as well too. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because I'm going to come to it a little bit later, and some of the applications that we have in the Data Futures platform really relates to these priorities and is absolutely anchored in recovering better and building forward from COVID. What I would want to say at this point is that the work that UNDP is doing, and this spans several teams, actually in the Global Policy Network and across other units within UNDP, is really geared towards the 3 emerging trends of our strategic plan. And the first is really around raising the ambition. And this is to support all countries in accelerating progress towards the SDGs. And of course, that's going to mean different things in different places, which means we need a toolkit that is multidimensional and that supports different countries in different ways based on those contexts. The second emerging trend for our strategic plan is maximizing impact across our signature solutions. So here I'm going to show you some of the insights and data applications that let you see the way that we're making connections across the signature solutions of UNDP, but also using data. In this case, for example, there are other enablers, digitization, finance, knowledge, and others that will also help help drive those interconnections. And the third is really supporting UNDP to become more agile and anticipatory, more flexible, and better able to respond to uncertainties. And of course, I think for many of you at UNDP and in other institutions, we're all learning a lot through COVID about how to do that. And we've created this space very intentionally to be user-driven, client-oriented. We are not suggesting that we know what the answers are and therefore, lead our partners in one or the other direction, but create spaces where we can start to explore options and interrogate trade-offs as a collective. So the Data Futures platform itself was launched last year. This combines, again, the work of several teams and certainly that of our crisis risk dashboard. So these are all joined up and moving in that same direction to inform our choices, to inform policy decisions which are taking place by our partners in country around the world, to really empower action and to use multidimensional data to be able to drive that. And I also appreciate Peter flagged this, and David, you mentioned, how do we ensure that we are supporting at the subnational levels, and what does this mean in terms of data-driven insights and analysis that can support at the level of cities. And certainly for UNDP, our ambition is really to be a leader in data and in data-driven solutions for UNDP. This would support our lead technical role in COVID response, and this is really part of our vision in next generation UNDP, which will also be reflected in our strategic plan. The platform itself is open to everyone, and this is very intentional. You can search the data. We won't get into this today, but you can search the data for any country in the world. At the moment, this is organized along the pillars of the socioeconomic response to COVID, and you see a little bit of that coming up there. What's really important to us in this platform is that we are focusing on the challenge areas which we think are most critical to COVID recovery, and we are putting that analysis and insight in the user's hands. You can search for any country, you can search for any region, and you can start to use some of the simulations which we put together to ask what-if questions. And I'm going to give you a couple examples, there are others, of what those what-if questions are that you can start asking and interacting with the data on the platform. So one example, I'm going to give you two little snapshots, and Ramiz is going to give you an exciting one as well too in the presentation that comes next, is around temporary basic income. On the platform, you can come and look for any country in the world and estimate what the fiscal space requirements would be to be able to provide temporary basic income to a certain proportion of the population. And it gives you ideas about financing, about trade-offs, about other options and so on in order to ensure that a particular population in a specific country has the basic protection that it needs. And I think this is particularly important in fragile settings where often social protection coverage is very, very weak and in some cases non-existent. So this is an example of a simulation which is data-driven, country-focused, and available to you to start to distill insights that can lead to policy choices that build forward from COVID. And the second example is a very exciting one we are just about to launch. And this is using data, using multidimensional data to support countries in their national vaccine deployment plans. And what we're doing here is partnering with WHO, partnering with other organizations, and this is certainly a collaboration for UNDP between our leadership at country level and WHO leadership. We're bringing together a set of indicators which we believe would be really critical to think through as countries are planning deployments of the vaccine, recognizing that those are going to be potentially staggered. This won't be a straight line forward, any of these deployments. So we're able to bring together data on affordability, on communication risks, on existing health facilities, on electricity grid, on historical vaccine patterns. And this is just sort of on risk exposure and also health and different demographics of a population. This is the wider menu for each country. They'll want to tailor the indicators that are most important to them, and we can work with them. This is our intention through Data Futures, to be able to visualize this on a map down to the district level at a level of granularity of 1 square kilometer. So we really can look at the impact on different neighborhoods in different communities and ensure that the way that we're responding, the way that we're deploying the vaccine is truly leaving no one behind. So this is to give you a sense of what we're thinking about and what's coming up next on the platform. As Peter had mentioned, we have a flagship initiative, again, launched towards the end of last year, assessing COVID impact on the SDGs. The first publication we launched in December, and the second flagship will be out on the 12th of April, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it now. The idea here, again, is to use data not to report backwards, use data for insights to help us think forward, help us plan those pathways, those development pathways, and make policy choices that are going to have the biggest impact across systems. We know that resources are limited. We know that certain contexts are going to be prohibitive in different ways. How do we navigate that to best impact? And what we found is that you can navigate, even with the uncertainties that we face through COVID. It is possible to make a set of choices that would not only see us recover from COVID, but actually put the world on a development trajectory ahead of where we would have been without COVID. And for many of you, that's probably not saying much because we know we were off track in the first place. But what's different about this modeling tool, you can find this on Data Futures, you can search for any country, you can search for any region, and you can start asking yourselves questions about how this would play out in different settings. When we looked at the second flagship, our focus, and very much to the theme of the discussion today, is around countries most at risk of being left behind. And we ran the same analysis as we had for the major report. This is based on 4 scenarios. One being a high damage scenario where recovery is incredibly protracted and difficult. One is the baseline, as we understand, based on GDP and mortality trends right now. And then we have this scenario we built around SDG interventions. We're calling it the Sdg Push, where we start to see that even in countries most at risk of being left behind, in fact, this is where the Sdg Push scenario has the greatest impact. And I'm giving you a little sense on the side of what some of the headlines will be for our publication when this comes out next week. But the reason why I wanted to put this here now is just through the intention of this webinar and through all of the work that we're doing at UNDP is really to challenge ourselves to think differently about future options, think differently about how we navigate uncertainties, and use data differently through scenarios, through simulations, through visualizations, which Ramiz is going to show us next, really help us make the most of the information that we do have. And as David said, in many cases, it's not that we're short of data itself, but how do we use this to greatest effect in order to alter and change development trajectories, which is so important in the decade ahead. So I'm just leaving you with a couple of thoughts in terms of what you can visit and who you can speak to. You can, of course, reach out to any of us directly. Peter and I lead the data hub and some of our analytic work on the GPN side. But thank you very much. I hope that this gives you an overview and an insight, and I hope that it energizes and inspires you to get onto the platform and take a look. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Laurel. Great stuff. And I think I very much wanted to amplify your message about using data differently for a wide range of very exciting applications for our work and thinking forward in different and exciting ways. So thanks for that. And this is the perfect segue to Ramiz Uddin, who comes from our UNDP Bangladesh office, where he's head of experimentation. And Ramiz is going to share with us a pilot data visualization index on social protection for Bangladesh. So Ramiz, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Can you hear me?
We can, loud and clear.
Can you see my screen?
We can, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that was very good. This is Ramiz from Bangladesh country office. I am head of experimentation here. And for the last 10 years, working for data innovation at the country office with national data partners, including data challenges and also SDG data. But Laurel has given a very good background of that global picture of the data innovation in terms of technology and lots of other dimensions But I'm going to present a specific case, what we have learned in Bangladesh and what types of technology we use here to make data platform or data analysis and visualization a bit enjoyable to understand for the policymakers and leaders who can look at and then see the picture, how it helps in decision making. If you look at this graph, but before starting this presentation, I should mention, okay, we have lots of data in Bangladesh. We are working together with lots of partners. But what about the data? What about the data quality? How you are communicating with this data with the partners? But a small case with the multi-dimensional poverty and also social safety net data, and also some other indicators we are going to present here very simply, but it will give you a different picture because many dimensions integrated here based on the how to mitigate the challenges using different technology like a 3D technology here. But if you look at this picture, like in this picture, you will see that how data and then MPI, multidimensional poverty, is patterned in different ways, in different location. It is a bit yellow is showing minimum MPI, multidimensional poverty, and also the red one is high multidimensional poverty in some of the areas. The southern part is the coastal belt, and the right side, that is the eastern part, is our mountainous and a bit poor side. So you can understand the picture. But if we look at the second graph, the poor health, and then also if you look at this poor health and also multidimensional poverty, so you all know that we consider 10 different indicators for measuring the multidimensional poverty. If you look at the poor health, and definitely one particular Upajala here, district, we have 64 districts in Bangladesh. And if you look at the that is the darker one, that is Bandarban, Bandarban district, that is in terms of Bandarban district, you can see the highest MPI. Highest MPI, it is showing the red color, I told you, and then the lowest minimum MPI shows the yellow color. But if you look at the poor health, and then you can see the purple color, that is the, it is not like that poor health also corresponds to the high MPI. In some of the lower MPI can also contribute the higher health vulnerability. But if we look at the next, there is the poor education. I will show you only the few slides and look at, but I should also look at, if you look at this, all this pattern, okay, this is the mountainous area, this is the coastal belt area, and the light area where MPI is lower, multidimensional poverty and higher. But if we look at the poor education, but definitely you will see that the picture is a bit different. It is not like that the pattern is going, but most of the cases we found that poor education follows that high MPI. But in most of the cases, in most of the districts, it is not in some cases. But we looked at the pattern of based on the income expenditure survey, based on the other poverty survey. If we compare with the multidimensional poverty, in some of the cases we found that it goes together. It has very high correlation between two types of poverty. But it is not like about the country analysis, not like about the district analysis. It is like about the, when you are looking at this 3D picture, so very easily you can compare between the 2 or 3 dimensions of your indicator, and at the same time, where are the inconsistencies, how it can be resolved with that some kind of intervention, and then can draw the policymakers' attention to resolve those issues and fill the gaps. Laurel already mentioned that, okay, how to identify the LNOB pattern in doing some kind of comprehensive data disaggregation. So it is the one initiative under this future data initiative, that is the using our technology to look at how the poor standard living, if you look at this pattern, and at the same time, if you look at the MPI, it goes together. But it is not like that. Where we should, policymakers should we should draw the attention for the policymakers and others with this different type of indicators in terms of education, in terms of poverty. But 3D, in some of the graphs, we show that, okay, there are some correlation between two indicators. So that types of technology we have. But this type of higher level technology, what we are working together for the future data model, this data initiative. So it is showing you this comparing between districts, comparing between area, and then showing you the pattern, the north side and the mountainous side and coastal belt, the interior region where access to education and access to health is a bit difficult. They are showing the darker place where MPI is very high. But if you look at these three dimensions, so you can look at the education contribution to the overall multidimensional poverty. You can see the standard of living, and you can see the health contribution. But you can see that using these three dimensions, you can get a one message that, okay, which pattern is consistently giving one message to you that it is has get some attention for the people. But if we look at that, why this area is a bit highly vulnerable in terms of education, but when we look at the MPI, it is lower MPI. But like that way, we should look at the specific areas with that comprehensive uh, data disaggregation. We can come up with this type of technology and look at the figures to draw the attention, which can give us the some extension. What is this showing this graph? 64 district I told you in Bangladesh. But what is the pattern here? So if you look at that, okay, in which district it is showing that pattern is like that. But if you look at the Narayanganj, what is the pattern in terms of this indicator, where this indicator is showing? It is 64 district under each of the indicator, and then you can see the pattern where which district is higher and lower in terms of this indicator. And at the same time, if you look at the individual pattern, so you can see the location of this district, particular district. Like if it is Khulna district, you can see that, okay, where the location of the in terms of this indicator. I'm not going to show you the what is the specific pattern of Bangladesh, but this type of technology can come up with some idea which can give us a lot of pattern. But I should mention some of the learning what we had in Bangladesh. That is, it is not very easy to get all this type of data from the government offices, and in partnership with National Data Office, National Statistics Office, and many other offices like Social Security, we had to come up with some lots of discussion, and UNDP has lots of contribution in producing all this data. It is not only the survey data. In the same time, we also had to depend on some kind of quality in administrative data. In some kind of context, you will see this administrative data is better than the survey data, because survey data they are not giving you the specific areas where you can take the decision, like a very sub-district level analysis, very district level analysis in a particular area. Can some kind of a very particular data can give you a very in-depth disaggregation, but in survey data can aggregated level. But this pattern is enough, what we have done here. But in future, we are looking at lots of other indicators which can give us a bit very good insights. Merging many other indicators with this platform can come up with lots of insights which we can use and then also replicate in other countries, which can give us a bit so it is not only like that. In partnering with other data like big data and also system generated data, which also can come up. So in future, we should go together and we should come up with ideas how data intelligence can give us lots of insights which make our decision making a bit faster and efficient. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Ramesh, so much for that. And I think a very nice and very compelling example of how data and technology come together and can be used to, as you say, help policymakers and politicians make more informed and better choices, which is, of course, very important for our work going forward. And thanks also for raising some of the points about obtaining data in different forms, which we'll come back to. Let's move to our next panelist now, which is Martine from UN Ethiopia. She's a peace and development specialist there. And Martine's going to be presenting on the crisis risk dashboard that we in our team in UNDP have helped set up for Ethiopia. Martine, a warm welcome and over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter. This has really been, as you also said, a perfect segue, I think, into the crisis risk dashboard for Ethiopia. I'll try and touch upon really three elements today from our work with Crisis Bureau and UN agencies on the CRD. And I'll also try to make it really, really tangible for you. So first, I'll briefly talk about why we started developing the CRD and what kind of data gaps it's addressing in Ethiopia. I'll then go into the structure of our CRD and its dimensions by providing some examples of how we use it, and most importantly, coming into what kind of change it may have catalyzed. So in Ethiopia, we started developing the CRD to respond to a few major challenges. So the first is the fact that the risk landscape in Ethiopia has changed quite a lot in the past few years. And the UN is now dealing with humanitarian crises that are increasingly caused by conflict rather than natural disasters. We're now also looking at more upcoming political processes, such as general elections in June, bearing risks of widespread violence and political crises. As well, we have had major issues with data availability in Ethiopia. So in particular, there was a great need for more gender-sensitive data on conflict. So I'll take you through some of the elements of our CRD that has really helped us address that. Just firstly, to provide, I think, a few quick notes on the development process. So throughout, we've had consultations with key agencies to get a feel of what the UNCT had, what they needed, and what the CRD could actually provide. So now rapid prototyping by Crisis Bureau really helped to get those conversations going. We found that the scope for the Ethiopian context should really be to initially focus on variables indicating conflict, security, and political risks. After that really followed a very effective period of co-design with Crisis Bureau, also readjustments before the official launch to the whole UNCT last year. So first of all, I mean, a major benefit of the CRD for us has been that we have been able to fully adapt it to our context. So now, since the launch of our cooperation framework last year, we've chosen really to structure the CRD around those 4 pillars, which I think is very recognizable to most UNDP colleagues. People, peace, prosperity, and planet. So we now have really data for all indicators in the cooperation framework, and we've tied some of the major internal data sets from agencies in the UN and external to that on severity of needs, conflict hotspots, and peace building interventions to the outputs of the framework, which you can see here. So sharing analysis and data has really been a big challenge for our country office, as I assume is the case in other countries as well. And for us, particularly when we're trying to work towards that famous triple nexus. So for us, the CRD as a tool has really encouraged that sharing of data and analysis across the humanitarian and development agencies. So in this dashboard page, OCHA share their assessment of the severity of needs for IDPs. Now, this was very key for our interagency task force that works on developing situation analysis, scenarios, and triggers for the upcoming elections. And then with those scenarios, building on those, agencies are preparing contingency planning for humanitarian and political crises on all levels, national, regional, and sub-regional. And especially then particularly those areas that are prone to escalate into conflict. And with this, it's really easy to see what those areas are. And they can be highlighted, the severity rating and level in this way. So having that data readily available at the zonal level, one of the administrative levels in Ethiopia, has really improved that process. So let me just see, yes. So again, for our scenario and contingency planning work, we're really using just as much open source data as internal data. And in the CRD, we now really have those side by side. Here we have the latest iteration of Atlet's monitoring of political violence. Now on this page, we really get a feel of both the trend development of political violence, but also the nature of the incidents. So since the Tigray crisis, sexual violence has been on a very steady increase and really became a key element of our scenarios for pre and post-election violence. So now, for the past few months, we've also worked to emphasize the need for better conflict sensitivity in development interventions. And so, as I mentioned, as the UN really is now operating in a different environment than what we're used to, this was another data set here that has been very useful when we're producing trainings and guidelines for conflict sensitivity purposes. So here we can clearly see implications of conflict in the number of IDPs. That we can highlight in this way, for instance. So just to mention as well that, as I said, gender disaggregation of data and UN analysis for Ethiopia has been a big gap. So throughout the CRD, we've now also focused on gender sensitivity in every dimension. So for instance, here we can kind of quickly see the disaggregated number of female IDPs in a particular hotspot, all the way down to zonal level. All right, so really the last example that I wanted to highlight is related to how we can use the CRD to more so monitor the impact of our interventions. So this dashboard page is based on data that a UN CSO working group collected last year. And it's showing peacebuilding interventions in Ethiopia by target group, organization type, etc. So for instance, I'm going to try here. If you're starting a project or going to the field and you need to know who is targeting youth by dialogue in a particular place, you could quickly find that out. Doing here a live demonstration is always nerve-wracking, but it seemed to be working well by selecting the approach and also selecting the target group and getting a list, and also look at the geographical spread of where those interventions are. And we can pretty easily see that perhaps this is something that the UN should focus more on in the future. So now this mapping came about as we've had a huge increase in peacebuilding interventions and civil society organizations since Abiy took over in 2018. So currently, with many localized conflicts of different characteristics and a very new Ministry of Peace, there's no really clear peacebuilding strategy for the country yet. So our assumption was that this led to a lot of duplication and ad hoc programming that was not necessarily very strategic. So now with these mappings, we now have a start to addressing that. It was particularly useful, I think, when we compared it to another set of internal data that is displayed here in the conflict mapping. So in this mapping, UNDP had gathered data on conflict intensity, duration, and a type of conflict. So whether based on inter-ethnic violence, border issues, resource scarcity, etc. It's also noted here where there's evidence of violence against women in a conflict situation. So by aligning this data on zonal levels, as we did in the peacebuilding dashboard page, we can now more easily analyze the effectiveness of targeting the different groups in the different geographical hotspots within our intervention. So as well, I think that the hope over time is that we might be able to see whether a decrease in conflict intensity in a particular zone potentially coincides with a certain type of intervention. So I'm coming to an end here, and I think just finally, I think this, the CRD is not really, I mean, it's not a perfect solution to risk monitoring, but it's, for us, it's definitely a tool that's enabling us to improve our analysis and really keep track of conflict trends and risk-informed programming. So I think going forward, we really want to focus on ways to integrate social media as well, and particularly hate speech monitoring in connection to our very recent hate speech strategy and action plan. And we also want to focus on making it more integrated into the work of the agencies, also on the field offices. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Martine. And thank you also again for highlighting some of the benefits of the CRD for things like monitoring impact and targeting. I think that's very important. And also would be very keen to come back to you a bit more on how you plan to integrate the social media dimensions into that. Let's finally move to our last speaker, Lillian from UNDP Lebanon. Lillian is going to share with us how they have undertaken a rapid and innovative socioeconomic impact assessment following the Beirut blast, and how this is an innovative way of collecting and using data. Lillian, over to you, please.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you guys for having me. It's hard to follow all these great presentations and all this great work. My name is Lillian Abuzeki. I am the head of solutions mapping at the Lebanon CO's Accelerator Lab. And I'll be walking you through our collaboration with the Surge Data Hub from Crisis Bureau over the past 7 months after the Beirut blast. I like to call this data and engagement because I think it touches upon a lot of the points that Laurel has highlighted around what do we do with data, especially in crisis, especially in fragile context, and how do we really empower and apply the data strategy, and how does it take shape? So I call that engagement. Just before we continue, I like to stop at the notion of the Accelerator Labs, because I believe that the agility of the structure, the deliberate design organizationally, has assisted us in being partners in crisis across all countries where we are deployed, I guess, in terms of 91 countries where the labs have launched since 2019. That's quite unfortunate, but I think it's, especially because it's crisis, but I think it's important because it highlights the importance of agility. We are not an accelerator or incubator in the traditional sense, and we are not an innovation unit either, but what we are is we're trying to accelerate learnings in an experimental space and time-boxed and well-measured spaces. Which is why when this happened in August 4 last year, the largest peacetime explosion in history, supposedly, in 3 days' time after the blast, the mobility and expertise of the Surge Data Hub, the agility of the lab, and the leadership of our CO all came together for us to produce a data pipeline that continues to this day. And that's really the pipeline idea, is really where the engagement is. So I'll be walking you through our data journey so far in 3 areas, and that is assessment and collection, which is really where we've worked very closely with Data Surge Hub on assessment and collection, analysis and access as a gateway to data empowerment and governance. And third is culture and workflow, which is the more granular work around recovery, human-centeredness, and like a data-driven approach. The socioeconomic impact assessment is a a assessment that our colleagues at Search Data Hub have deployed before us in 45 countries in crisis post-COVID. And Beirut was in crisis, no different, but very different. We were not in a place where we could send enumerators to people's homes because homes did not exist anymore. And we also needed to have a trauma-informed approach around cognitive load and assessment fatigue because we wouldn't want to exert more pressure on people who have just lost so much. So what we did at the time and what our collaboration resulted in was the rollout of the Socioeconomic Impact Assessment, SEA, through Facebook ads, which was, I believe, the first for this kind of assessment. In a period of 6 days, second week after the blast, we were able to collect 9,000 data points into this assessment. And it has proved to be a very rich data source for both our programs, partners, and for our own internal data pipeline. This particular window of time on the blast was important because it was fresh, it was fast, and if we were to do it traditionally, it would have taken at least 3 to 4 weeks. But what's more important is the engagement that was able to snowball after we've developed that SEA with Search Data Hub. So this is a little snippet of what went on in the background of actually taking data and building an engagement platform around it. Which leads me to my other point around analysis. So while collection and assessment in development world, I find is very synonymous to data as well with M&E. But I think in terms of analysis, there are many ways where we can actually push data out in a way that informs people and informs recovery and informs decision making. And I feel I would echo Ramiz's presentation here when we actually collaborated with 2 brilliant data scientists, and that also calls to the agility of the lab and our structure. And we were able to take the data from SEA and map it out in a visual multi-vulnerability index that you see on the left, where you see really where the crisis hit worst. And also it can inform our neighborhood recovery approach, which was built on a leave no one behind framework. On the right is a more exploratory space. That GIF that you see rotating, that's basically a mix of urban morphology analysis and pop density analysis that the data scientists were able to kind of layer on top of assessment data and on top of the spatial data of Beirut to look at how can we have a neighborhood-centered recovery. If we're actually calling for a data-informed and a neighborhood-centered recovery, it would be important for us to look, how do the neighborhoods define themselves? So using the way traffic interacts with the city, the way the actual neighborhood defines itself, how motion happens, how interactions happen, you can see that even though officially cadasters are drawn around 10 areas of Beirut, which are called neighborhoods, in fact, we have somewhat around 50 to 30 clusters that can be considered neighborhoods. So even though this is exploratory, it definitely does, again, paint a picture around engagement and how do we converse around data-driven approaches and how do we discuss creatively, how do we take this analysis forward. This is another element of the analysis that was done as well. And even though it's not necessarily related to the SEA, but because the SEA started off such conversations, it also allowed us to look at the vulnerability that existed before the crisis. And as you see at the top, you see that at any moment in time in Beirut, you are 20 plus minutes away walking from a hospital, but you also see that there's this belt of healthcare almost inaccess in Beirut, and there's really this traffic of hospitals at the center. While at the bottom, you see that at any point in time, you're no less than 6 minutes away walking from any educational institute. So while these are nice to have, they're also very informative on any conversation that really wants to target vulnerability, especially that health and education from our development reports happen to have a huge element in that. And this leads me to the second point of analysis and access. And it's really about empowering our teams and empowering people and partners with data. So while the SEA was, I think, 25 questions, and each of them has a dimension, how can we make that accessible? So also in this particular product that we developed with these 2 data scientists, we were able to build something called a SEA Explorer, which also was a great idea, I believe. They used the Flourish tool that allows you to really explore the data in an interactive way. And even though as a lab, our mandate is to experiment, we did experiment with Tableau, we did experiment with reports, emails, workshops. So this is something we're going to publish soon. And hopefully I'll just drop in the link in the chat so that if you want access to it or to get notified when it gets published, you'll be able to see it. But hopefully we're trying to push this out in an open data approach to the public and to partners, and try to use the data as an engagement point between us and others so that we can discuss this and actually move it forward. The last part that I want to really talk about in terms of this data and engagement platform that was kind of the byproduct of our collaboration with the Surge Data Hub is our actual delivery. So our work on recovery in Lebanon. So as you see on the left, the area I highlight in yellow is Karantina. And Karantina, long before the crisis, has suffered a lot. It has consistently been the home to very vulnerable people, displaced people, refugees, migrant workers. And come the blast, it was completely decimated. So on the right, you see someone like Rita. Rita is someone that UNDP is working with right now. Her home was completely destroyed. Her kids lost all their jobs. And her husband lost his taxi that was their livelihood. They had to rent out a space. So as you see, besides her vulnerability that existed, she now has layers and layers of other vulnerabilities. And for us to actually offer an integrated approach to helping people like Rita, we needed to have an integrated approach to how we talk about our work with each other and with others. So here it took me to engagement in the form of culture and workflow, to kind of look at data as a workflow language, as almost a vascular blood capillary that moves along amongst the different teams. And even though we all know that in UNDP and large development organization, we work in portfolios or departments, these occasions are the space when you're delivering at such a integrated dimension. These are spaces where you can bring your people together around data and using that as a tool to bring the voices together. I like this particular myth of Nimrod's Tower because it really expresses what this tries to do. And I'm not sure if you're all familiar, but I'll just say it quickly. This tower, Nimrod wanted to get this tower up to the sky, and the only thing that really stopped him is the fact that no one from the workers shared the language and they couldn't communicate. So this is really how I'd like to look at data, and that's really what we tried. That's the third iteration of our data and engagement work that we've done with Crisis Bureau, Data Surge Hub. And that was to actually quickly and in short amount of time, try to do the comparative research work, deploy an off-the-shelf product that allows us for a smart database solution, that allows us to see all of the people that we assessed in Karantina, for example, and where do our offers overlap in their story. On the right, you see how that can be visualized in the Power BI. This is just a snapshot of time of the prototype, but this has also become an engagement moment for our teams, and it is used in team meetings, and hopefully it'll become more and more a tool that we use internally. And basically that's it. I just wanted us to really walk through this journey from a data and engagement perspective, and I'll leave it over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Great, thanks Lillian so much. And I really wanted to amplify your message around how you use data to bring people together. I think that's a really nice way for us to reflect on things. Colleagues, we're running short of time, but I wanted to have a few questions for some of the panelists to stimulate some discussion. We also have lots of questions in the chat. We're going to ask some of the panelists to answer those questions specifically, and then hopefully we'll still have time to come back to them as well. Let me quickly go back then to our speakers and maybe just follow up with a few questions for them. David, a question about data scarcity or challenges in obtaining data. What do you find in your work are some promising developments in using proxy indicators or new technologies to obtain data that may be scarce in some of the domains or indicators that you identified? Over.
Sure. Thanks very much, Peter. I think in our work, you could probably categorize the approaches in two ways. There's a sort of analysis aspect of it, whereby you compare different indicators and see which indicators are linked. And so, I mean, a couple of years back, the Institute for Economics and Peace did a comprehensive data audit of the SDG 16 plus indicators. And presented a series of potential proxy indicators that aren't officially part of the SDGs, but show stronger relationships with what the SDGs are trying to capture, in the hope that while the SDG process is collecting data, that these can offer some insights in the interim. One of the things that we're currently doing, again with UNDP in Oslo, the governance center, is looking at interlinkages between the SDGs, and not just at the global level, which tends to be where a lot of focus goes when you're talking about data and interlinkages. The first port of call is correlations. What we're actually trying to do is say, okay, well, when this particular SDG changes in this particular country, what other things change? What are the statistically significant observable changes at the country level, rather than just doing a sort of global correlation analysis and saying that these particular things are linked. And certainly some of I think, for a lot of countries, we're in Australia, so we do a lot of work with the Pacific Island nations. Simplicity is key for a lot of those countries, and so using the work that the Institute for Economics and Peace does, primarily in the Positive Peace Index, which we've shown has pretty strong links with SDG 16 and can be used as proxies. The Solomon Islands are starting to use that sort of more simplistic approach for their VNRs. So rather than trying to report on 247 SDGs, they're using in our case, the 8 pillars of peace within the Positive Peace Index, just to have something to report on and have something to benchmark against. And in terms of innovation, so as I said, with the Pacific Island nations, there's a lot of good examples of innovative approaches there. I mean, again, not to toot UNDP's horn, but the ones that I do know about are partnerships with the Papua New Guinea government and UNDP on Phones for Corruption, where they've set up a SMS hotline for citizens to report potential episodes of corruption. I know also in terms of resource degradation, there's similar applications for fish resources, fish stock within the region. So there's many sort of activities going on, but one thing that I always sort of mention when we're thinking about innovative ways of collecting data and proxies is sometimes low-tech solutions are pretty good as well. Again, with the work that we were doing in the Pacific Island nations, we were trying to find data on SDG 16, and we just started asking people, and they gave us all this data. So, the police were very open to the best of their abilities with sharing data, and we wouldn't have known that data existed had we not just asked. So there's low-tech solutions as well. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, David. Laurel, a question for you linked to this also, where there might be challenges in terms of the quality of data in particular countries. And we've heard a little bit about that from some of the different speakers. Can you give us a sense about your approach in terms of building national capacities for data collection and analysis, working perhaps with national statistics officers, and what are some of the things that UNDP is trying to do to support those processes? And Serge, if you want to come in on that as well, please feel free. Laurel, over to you, please.
I'm not sure that Laurel is still with us, Peter.
Okay,
she
so
might
do
have
you want to take that question?
Sure.
So
sure,
building national capacities for data gathering and analysis.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for the question, and happy to join this session. It's very interesting discussions. National capacities is it's an important issue for statistics, obviously, and I think that there are two dimensions to capacities for statistics. I think it's one, it's on the how data is actually produced, and I think the other side is how the data is used, and the two really have to go hand in hand to extract the maximum value from data. I will start up pointing out that we do have a new data strategy in UNDP that was announced just this Monday, so it's fairly fresh. But I think that is a strategy that will provide an overall frame for the support that we in UNDP provide to statistical capacity for in our program country, but also it would help organize how we in UNDP structure our support and our own use of data as a strategic asset. If we think that data is a strategic asset, then capacity for data are important. Data literacy for UNDP staff and for our program country becomes quite critical. Now, there are three things that I would like to point out regarding the work that we do to strengthen statistical capacity. One, the first thing is that we work a lot with partners. We do have to acknowledge that we work in we're coming into an ecosystem where there are a lot of players that have been supporting statistical capacity for a while, and that actually do have institutional mandates to support statistical capacity. We do collaborate with the UNDP Statistics Division to strengthen capacity for SDG indicators. So overall implementation of the global SDG indicator framework at country level, particularly with regard to how countries develop their national SDG indicator platform and reporting processes, and the norms and standards around that. We have collaborations with institutions like Paris 21, which is a global partnership for statistics in the 21st century, which is hosted by OECD. And it's the main body that support national strategies for statistics and capacity building for statistical national statistical offices. We do have collaboration at regional level and at country level in many instances in running capacity building programs with Paris 21. And we do also have a strong collaboration with partners like UNICEF, which are strong data producers. They produce, they support the mixed surveys, and we've collaborated with UNICEF to strengthen capacities for using the mixed surveys to compute the MPI. For example, we've had regional workshops in Asia Pacific on that, and we also do have at country level, in many instances, collaborations with other sister entities like UNFPA, which is one of the lead agencies supporting national censuses, and we do collaborate with them to support countries in producing their national censuses. I have to say that we are in the midst of the what is called the 2020 Census Round, and it's an important exercise that is that has been severely affected by the pandemic. The ability to have that baseline, population baseline of all the countries that supports the computation of virtually every other SDG indicator to monitor sustainable development. So it's an area where additional efforts will be needed to support countries to recover from the impact of the pandemic on statistical activities. We also do work on addressing data gaps. There's been mentioned by David of the work of the Oslo Governance Center, which I would reemphasize here. There's been a significant effort done by the Oslo Governance Center to advance measurements in governance statistics and support SDG 16 through the work of the governance team and Oslo Governance Center. We've supported the establishment of a working group at the UN Statistics Commission to focus specifically on the norms and standards for measuring governance statistics. It's called the Prior Group, which is supported by UNDP, and a lot of the work on monitoring SDG 16 builds on the Prior Group and the guidance provided by the Prior Group to measure governance statistics. Through the Oslo Governance Center, there are pilots and capacity building activities, training workshops for national statistical offices on how to monitor SDG 16, particularly the four indicators for which UNDP is custodian of, which focus on inclusive governance, responsive service delivery, and access to justice. And the last thing that I would mention is the focus on data use, and I think this is quite important, quite critical. We've seen many examples here of data visualization. We've mentioned our data futures platform, which provides analytics tools, new ways of looking at data to inform policymakers. And this is an area where actually we have to start putting this data in the hands of policymakers and train them on the use of all of these tools. So we've had, as I mentioned, some training workshops on the MPI, which is one instruments through which you can inform policy, and you can use data to inform policy by computing the multidimensional poverty index. We're working with World Bank and UNICEF to develop guidance for countries on how to produce their national MPI. It's work that is led by the Inclusive Growth team in the GPN. And we are providing advanced analytics on the Data Futures platform, which Laurel has mentioned and has described. As part of that, we are running a series of trainings on how to use some of these tools and how to reproduce at country level some of the analytical work that we're doing for the reports, such as the impact of COVID-19 on SDG achievement. So that we're working with the Party Center for International Futures on providing these sort of capabilities to colleagues at country level so that they can support governments. So these are some of the ways that we've been supporting statistical capacity. And I'll stop here, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Serge. That's great and very comprehensive. Maybe linking that question to a question for Ramiz on how to build confidence with government counterparts, Ramiz, on the use of data, particularly sensitive data. Any reflections or thoughts from your side?
Thank you, Peter. Very good question. But I wanted to share Bangladeshi experience because for this data model, we also worked with UNDP regional offices and headquarters, and also at the same time with National UN Statistics Office. But need-based data model, that is very important. How you know that the health data person working with that specific data for 20 years, 30 years, he has lots of insights. If you look at the nutrition data, so need-based data is one approach to build the capacity. That is very interesting. There is the gap analysis. What is the gap for the quality reporting? So that can give them an insight that, okay, what types of data innovation required to fill the gaps? That is interesting one, what we worked for the data innovation. And when you are looking at, okay, we should report to present our achievement, to present our work, how to come up with the different types of data can give some food to the policy makers and to convince for the short-term and long-term decision making and also the planning. That is the key question to work with the government partner, and that helps a lot in bringing when the data partners, mainly the government, public institution, including the National Statistics Office, work together, then can helps a lot in the country office and UNDP and other offices to come up with the data innovation and work together. That provide lots of capacity, what we found. And national data platform, that is the integration, data sharing and data integration. That is the important issue. And then lots of technology already available. How you are introducing and communicating all these data technologies with your partners, with the public agency, with the specific National Statistics Office, SDG integrated, connected National Statistics Office with other government agencies, including the Prime Minister's Office, including the Cabinet Division, because this is lots of indicators, and that came up with lots of insight. Why? There's the challenge in data innovation. You know that the data challenge of SDGs, that challenge, actually building capacity of the national data partners, including National Data Statistics Office. 2016, 2017, 2018, in different countries, and across the world in different countries faced lots of data challenges. Now coming up with some kind of solution with technology and then with data integration. So working with the need-based and challenges, coming up with the ideas using technology when you are in data intelligence platform and collective intelligence. So that is giving a huge what we have introduced here, that is the 3D mention, when 3 indicators coming up together, looking at when you can see the relations. So that is the key. People see the different picture, not only the database, not only the huge number of data. You can see the conclusion and then insight immediately within a short time. That is the huge things. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramesh. Talking of sensitive data, Martine, you talked a bit about the issue of struggling to get gender disaggregated data in Ethiopia. How have you in Ethiopia dealt with this issue? And are there any reflections or promising developments you can share with us in terms of getting better gender disaggregated data for your work in Ethiopia? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think the beginning of that answer is definitely something that we all know, is how to balance, information sharing and review with data protection policies, and particularly when it comes to incidents of sexual violence, ensuring survivors' right to confidentiality and safety is an incredibly important principle for the UN and in general. So, as you saw in the CRD, Atlet's reporting of sexual violence in Tigray was simply the number of incidents, right? And this keeps confidentiality, but on its own, this data doesn't necessarily provide enough contextual information to allow us to make informed decisions about designing programs, for instance. At the same time, we've had conversations with OHCHR who wish to share more reporting about human rights violations within the rest of UNCT, but it's difficult because of this sensitive data. So I think really the solution to this might be this in part might be the CRD. So because it's a closed platform that only allows very strict access to certain staff, it is also possible within that platform to create smaller platforms where you can share with, again, only even more close number of participants. So the CRD could be and has been really a way to do that. But of course, the CRD is also only a tool. So if you have those numbers, you can use additional confidential analysis and reporting from the different agencies to build on those numbers, right? And I think just to finally say what the CRD has done is to really just make us a bit more aware of the importance of sharing data within the UNCT. And it's beginning to change a bit on that culture. But again, we're all very much aware of the sensitivity of certain data and trying to work on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Martine. Lillian, a question for you related to data protection and privacy. With the kind of technologies that you were using with, I guess, cell phones and things like that, how did you guys deal with those issues? And there was also a related issue in the chat, I think, about the Facebook dimensions of your work. So any reflections on that from your side?
Sure. I think, so we used Facebook advertisement model to shoot out the assessments in such a short period of time and in a time space that's so close to the incident. And that's really to meet people where they are, given that they are most likely on their cell phones. In terms of data privacy, all data that was collected went into a smart database that is basically governed within our own internal data structures. But I think this particular question can be answered not just in terms of and OCHA servers. Thanks, Fabian. Yes, that's true. So in terms of the data privacy, when we did actually the assessments, people were informed on what kind of survey they were taking, and they self-reported. And that data was then stored on Ultra servers and on our data. And that is where we really try to tap into the data strategy 2030, is to try to understand that at such a moment of crises where basically you can tell that the way we ran into assessments, for example, on the ground could vary. The data language in terms of assessment there was not particularly uniform. But as we started to build engagement around data as an office, and especially around crisis, we started to unify those data languages and how we're working on data. And one of those areas is data privacy. So now with the prototype that we've deployed using the off-the-shelf product called Activity Info, we are very keen on having all data in one place. And I think the practice or the idea around understanding as a team, every person from a frontline engineer to a person in a managing position, that data has a capacity to be sliced and you can share it in different variations and you don't have to share everything as long as you're using the same kind of platform as opposed to Excel sheets or maybe email threads or so on. I think with data privacy, using basic best practices is really the top thing we can do, and that's really what we're trying to do here. Over.
Thanks, Lillian. Colleagues, we're nearly running out of time, so I wanted to just quickly turn to my colleague Corrado to maybe talk a little bit about some of the questions that have come up in the chat around access to the data that is in these various databases. And then maybe Serge, coming to you, the questions around harmonization and standardization of the data and the different platforms and databases. So if you can just prepare for that. Corrado, over to you, Bios, on the access question.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everyone. I'm Corrado with Peter's team in the Crisis Bureau in New York, UNDP. On the access, so on the Crisis Risk dashboard, the CRDs are meant to serve UNDP and in some cases the wider UN, so the access is restricted to those users that the country office asks us to include. Most of the data that's included in there is open source and openly available. Some of it is internal or internally collected. But I will add to that as mentioned by my colleagues, the Data Futures platform is fully open. And the plan, also to address another question in the chat box, is for these initiatives to come together and all this data to eventually be easily accessible through one common platform. That doesn't mean that the CRD will not continue to exist. It will for this audience, but there will be this more open-ended application also further developed. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Corrado. Serge, any final comments from you on harmonization, standardization, access, anything else on the data strategy?
Well, the data strategy is the answer, Peter, obviously. But yes, indeed, I mean, it's reusability and harmonization, standardization. These are issues that the data strategy will tackle. It's actually among the core principles that are the basis for the strategy. It's reusability and interoperability, openness, standardization. There will be a central data architecture that will be established through the UNDP data strategy. We're already making progress within the GPN. We've been working on a GPN data hub that would help us have a bird's eye view of all the data initiatives, at least across the GPN, and how that's managed in a coherent manner within the GPN, and working through the data strategy to have that for the entire organization as well. And that runs across the regional bureaus, BMS as well, where we would have a corporate approach to how we manage data as a strategic asset.
Thanks, Serge, so much. So colleagues, we've come to the end of our time together. So let me just, first of all, thank all the panelists very much for joining us today and for your great insights and sharing of the exciting initiatives that you're all involved with. Thanks also to all the participants. I think at one point we had more than 130 colleagues joining us, which is great. It's clear that these new and innovative approaches to risk monitoring, data gathering and analysis, and all the different platforms and technologies will be very critical for our work in addressing crisis and fragility going forward. And as we heard from Serge and other colleagues, we have the new data strategy, we have the GPN data hub that is working to bring all this work together in a coherent fashion. So as they say, watch this space. Also, just to note that data gathering and analysis will also be, as we heard from David, will be a key element of our new crisis and fragility framework with the model that the IEP is helping us design. And of course, this will also be critical for UNDP's work more broadly, particularly in implementing the humanitarian development peace nexus. I think Martine also mentioned that in terms of the work at country level. And finally, as I mentioned at the beginning of our session, we will meet again in June for another development dialogues on this topic with a broader range of stakeholders and partners. And so we hope that you'll join us for that event also in a few months. And with that, stay safe and healthy, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much and see you all soon. Bye-bye.